Ladies and gentlemen, it was a busy weekend in politics as Floyd Shivambu was made the Secretary General of the MK Party. This marks the 50 millionth Secretary General of the MK Party since it was formed, but in any case, before we get on to the main news story, if I can yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, it really does help, and if you'd like to support the work I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. I'm also on Substack, and if you'd like to check out all my thoughts on Substack, the link is in the description box below as well. So let's get on to the main news story. But before we do, can I remind you who currently leads that organization? Really scared of the MK Party, just remind yourself, it's not that scary. So let's actually get on to the main news. So at the weekend, Floyd Shivambu did an interview with SABC News, during which they asked him about his defection from the EFF to the MK Party. And noticeably, the first question they asked is, weren't you anti-Zuma? Because if you recall, the reason the EFF was set up in the first place was actually to challenge Jacob Zuma when he was still in office and get him removed from power because of state capture. So then the logical question was, how can you go from a position of opposition to now being friends? And Floyd Shivambu says, well, actually the reason that we were in opposition to Jacob Zuma is because we were misled. And so the interviewer asks him, what do you mean by misled? He says, well, there was this coordinated campaign by the media and other NGOs to oust Jacob Zuma, and we got caught up in it. The reason that there was this campaign is because Jacob Zuma was starting to adopt forms of RET policy, radical economic change policies, and that these were designed to redress the economic imbalances between the different demographics in the country. In other words, they were trying to uplift the black individuals whilst downplaying the whites. But I must say that this isn't actually the own that Floyd Shivambu basically thinks that it is, because it makes it sound like he was caught up in mob mentality, and that mob mentality basically meant that he took a position that he later regretted. Being led by mob mentalities in a democracy is not a good look, bud. So this led on to the next question, which is, what is your relationship with Ndlozi like? Because apparently you two are like brothers. He says, well, we are still like brothers. We've known each other for many, many years, but ultimately he took a position where he was anti-Jacob Zuma, and this led to a rift between the two of them. And it basically shows a clip of Ndlozi questioning what Jacob Zuma would do now if he were to come back into office that he didn't do then. He says that Jacob Zuma then was corrupt and inept, and how would anything change this amount of time later? He already had his time in office and he achieved nothing. And for this reason, Ndlozi says that he's not actually keen for the MK Party and the EFF Party to actually work together, because the EFF actually has a vehicle to push economic change in the country that the MK Party doesn't. So you may ask, well, why doesn't the MK Party have that vehicle? Well, according to Ndlozi, it's because it's all the same all over again. It's everything that happened like 10 years ago, just repeated now. If they couldn't do it then, what makes them think they can do it now? It's a fair comment. But according to Floyd Shivambu, this actually led to a rift between the two. Because you see, one of the reasons that, according to Floyd, the MK Party turned on the EFF is because the EFF was still, in many parts of the actual organization, not very pro-Zuma. And I yet again remind everyone that the reason that EFF was set up in the first place was actually in opposition to Jacob Zuma. So you see, interestingly enough, Shivambu was asked what he thinks of all the people that are attacking him on social media, specifically MK Party members, that he attempts to go back and basically shout at. And he calls those individuals crude kids in Malima, and he basically calls them liberal kids. So now the EFF's liberal? Who knew? Okay, so he says he doesn't shout to people on social media, he just educates them. Because you see, this always appears to be the rap sheet of communists. Whenever in doubt, just tell them you're educating them, because everybody else is too stupid to think for themselves. So they have to be told by the communist overlords exactly what to think. And if you don't think it, well, then you must be some form of anti-revolutionary or an agent. The next question that was asked was, what exactly do you think of the MK party's position on expropriation without compensation? And how is it different from the EFF's position? And he says, well, the MK party actually takes expropriation without compensation seriously. And they do this in order to create jobs and redress the economy. Somebody should really tell him that EWC isn't good for creating jobs because people don't want to invest in a place where their stuff can get stolen. Just saying. But I'm also reminded that when he was part of the EFF, he had the opportunity to vote for the ANC's amendment bill to the Constitution, and they voted it down on the basis that it wasn't radical enough. If you recall, the actual bill called for some forms of expropriation, placing whatever was expropriated into the custodianship of the state, but it didn't call for all land to be expropriated, for logical reasons. Because if you expropriate everything in Soviet style, you collapse the economy, and then you have Zimbabwe 2.0. Or in the worst case scenario, Mozambique 2.0. But interestingly enough, at the weekend, Dali Mpofu was also asked, what do you think will happen between the MK party and the EFF? Would you like to see them merge? And according to Dali, yes, he would. But news elsewhere says that one of the reasons that Dali fled the EFF for the MK party, even though he says he's a member of both parties, is because he was more in favor of working with Jacob Zuma directly than the leadership of the EFF. Because according to the EFF, they still want their political party to have its own identity and to be able to push forward its own agendas. So what can we take from all of this? Well, we can take from all of this that the actual dispute in the political parties and the reason that some people are leaving the EFF for the MK party is none other than Jacob Zuma. It's Jacob Zuma's return to frontline politics. And many of the individuals that fled the ANC in the first place to join the EFF on the basis of they were anti-Zuma is now pro-Zuma, and they're going to join his political party in order to fight against the ANC, even though they didn't like him in the first place. And then they wonder why people are saying that this is nothing forms of political careerism, where parties are jumping ship in order to promote their own personal agendas as opposed to any forms of ideological agenda or even political agenda that may benefit their constituencies. In many instances, it's now looking like all they're doing is jumping to vehicles that give them the biggest mouthpiece and the biggest paycheck. So what can we also take from the EFF's decline? Well, at the weekend, a professor was asked what he thinks of the actual decline of the EFF. And in that interview, he said,
but what I would be more keen to talk about is why the EFF is where it is today and the people are behaving in the manner they do. That for me is very critical for him and even those who are still staying in the party. Because you cannot build a party based on disrespect and vulgar, abusive and divisive language. The society we want to build doesn't resonate with the language spoken by the EFF in general. It's very divisive, it's very abrasive, it's contrary to the values that undergird the national constitution, reconciliation, social cohesion, and nation building. Number two, he brought it all to himself. Remember when he dissolved, right? Provincial structures like in Limpopo, saying they are not performing. In KwaZulu-Natal, here it's a man, he's a member of parliament. He could not fill in a bus with the people from his area because in the main are poor, they could not afford to pay. That fellow was kicked out. And I said it then, one day there will be a price to pay for the way that fellow was treated. And indeed, KwaZulu-Natal responded accordingly. Now, then there is also this thing in my view, the branding. You know, the clothing, the branding that they have, red beret every day, that's fine. But I'm sure there are days when people would just want to feel different. And I think they subscribe to it is because it's almost what the emperor wants. And their views are less material when it comes to certain things. You came to me on my terms, and if you cannot subscribe to them, or you think you have outlived them, the door is open.
This disrespectful and vulgar language means that parties actually don't come together in terms of nation building or unity, but often segregate and end up with forms of infighting. And now the EFF itself has forms of infighting. And he says that the Republic doesn't want this. The Republic wants unity. And I, for one, would say, yes, that's correct. But you see, I also then think that the MK party doesn't actually offer that unity because their language at the moment is the same as the EFF, just slightly more communist and polished, but ultimately they are nothing more than a clone of the EFF. The only difference is that rather having children slinging mud at each other and screaming and shouting with racial overtones, the individuals at MK Party are a little bit more polished in terms of at least keeping a can on it a little bit to at least make the rhetoric seem a little bit more palatable to the general public. But the differences between the two parties are actually very minute. So what will actually happen with Ndlozi? Is he going to jump ship to the MK Party? And the answer appears to be no, but maybe. Because at the weekend, he was asked whether he would accept the nomination for deputy president of the party now that Floyd Shivambu's left. And he said no. He said that he doesn't actually want those positions. He doesn't even really want the secretary general position. What he actually wants is just, coast by and see how it goes. This doesn't really seem like an individual with a plan. With that being said, his plan does mean that, according to him, he has no desires to jump ship to the ANC or the MK Party because neither of them offer vehicles for economic change. It's amazing how often individuals in their rhetoric talk about economic change, redress, and creating jobs, whilst all touting policies that create zero economic progression, create zero jobs, and might have forms of redress, but need redress to the political elites. Because let's face it, let's use the example of expropriation without compensation. The easiest way to uplift many individuals would be to expropriate all the land, cut it up into sectional titles, and provide everybody with title deeds to the little piece of land that they live on. The land itself would be worth money, would allow those individuals to do equity unlocking, whereby their land could be used to, get a bond on, progress their house, build things, because it'd actually be collateral against which a bank could tie a bond. This would allow many individuals to very quickly have forms of upward social mobility because they would immediately almost be given a cash injection in the form of the land that they live on. And this ultimately is what many people hope to see when they hear the words expropriation without compensation and land reform. That's not what they're going to get. What they're actually going to get is all the land up in the hands of the government. And then the government gives you 10-year leases to a property that's never yours. And the bank's never going to lend you any money on it because ultimately it was never yours in the first place. And the ability to occupy or use that land would be based on the goodwill of a politician that may change on the whim of a dime, like, Floyd Shivambu's position on Jacob Zuma. So ultimately, it's amazing how the language used sounds very good. The actual implementation of it would always lead to disaster. But in any case, that's my views. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, bye.